Hello, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Conversations. Conscious Conversations is a podcast and global community of self-healers, cycle breakers, and new earth leaders. Here we empower you to have uncomfortable conversations and show you deep healing through communication as we collectively bring awareness to our own triggers, habits, traumas, and soul's inner wisdom. Today, I'm so excited to share with you guys. We have a special guest, Dennis Walker. He is a journalist, puppeteer, and satirist. Is that correctly pronounced, Dennis?
Yes.
He's best known as the founder of Mycopreneur, he has accrued over 10 million views plus and platformed 130 mushroom entrepreneurs from 25 countries with his podcast. The Mycopreneur platform has become a globally recognized leader in the psychedelic and mushroom media space, with press coverage in Forbes and Rolling Stones, in addition to numerous other outlets. As a journalist, Dennis has written for High Times, Lucid News, Psychedelic Alpha, and a dozen other platforms across psychedelics and cannabis spaces. So excited to drop in with you today. I know we're going to have a hilarious conversation, the perfect prescription that anyone could need, which is psychedelics and healing through humor. So thank you so much for coming on, and I'm excited to drop in.
Me too. I'm tickled that you'd invite me. I'm such a big fan of yours, Daria, and you're really good at this intro business. You just leveled up. I host a lot of people on Mycopreneur, and I feel like you just set the high watermark. You set the bar for my own introductory phrases going forward. So thank you for the invitation. Hello, everybody.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear. And yeah, let's get right into it. I'd love to hear where you're from and how you got into this industry and what really sparked your interest in psychedelics.
Man, that's a long story, but we can give you the cliff notes here. I am from Southern California, San Diego, born and raised right on the border, affectionately referred to as Chulawana by some people, which illustrates the cosmopolitan, multinational vibe that we've got going on there. I believe you're not terribly far away up in Santa Monica or around that area. You're familiar with being in this melting pot where there's people from all different walks of life. And I really enjoy being around that kind of energy, a very diverse, very interesting community. So that's where I'm from. That's what shaped me in a lot of ways. And in Southern California, especially if you have an artistic bent and you're hanging around with musicians or with artists, this, that, and the other, you tend to come across mushrooms or various psychedelics. There seems to be this overlap between the creative industry and creative entrepreneurial types and psychedelics. So that's what thrust me into the world of psychedelics, is hanging out with other musicians and the cool kids at school in Southern California. And at that time, they were not particularly popular at large. It was still very much a niche demographic who were interested in psychedelics. And I attached myself to that demographic and learned in a recreational way how mushrooms could impact me in a very positive, very upbeat, very life-affirming way. And it was a number of months later, almost a year later, when I really started studying deeper dives and wanting to learn more about the broader potential of psychedelics, right? And I think that there's still the most wonderful tools for a small dose to be recreational with, to go to a bonfire, go to the beach, whatever. I'm a huge advocate for that. But also, as we know, they're potentially tremendously transformative in people's lives. And I'm glad that we're talking about this now. So that's how I got into it. Studied at the University of San Francisco, where I learned a lot more about the psychedelic legacy in the West. I was a stone's throw from Haight Street and living around Golden Gate Park. So there's a big overlap too between kind of the entrepreneurial tech culture and psychedelics. And I learned that. I had a baptism by fire, started learning about all these different incredible entrepreneurs and innovators who all had this shared practice and fascination of psychedelic use. And since then, I've gone on to extend that into the work that I'm doing today with Mycopreneur.
Wow, so beautiful. I love the spectrum of your journey. And I love how you mentioned how tech is just in a different world, and now how you've come to where you are now. And it's so inspiring to see you go around the world too. I know we dropped in about this on the Instagram live the other day, just like traveling to all these different mushroom festivals and biohacking conferences. Tell us how you've even heard about that internationally.
That's a good question. I'm still trying to answer it myself. I think the key is consistently share interesting work and cultivate your community, and the opportunities come through that. It's always going to come through someone that you have an alignment with and you're working together on something. And a lot of the times it's a surprise, honestly. Probably the first big conference I went to was Meet Delic in Vegas, and that was a random invitation. Hey, you want a press pass? You want to come with this company? Great. And that was the first time I tapped into this psychedelic conference circuit, which has grown exponentially in the last few years. And now there's multiple conferences in Miami, New York City, LA, Vegas, Denver, Austin, so on and so forth. I didn't know about any of this until I went to Horizons in New York City, which was Meet Delic. Then I went to Horizons, tapped into the medical, clinical industry side of the psychedelic space. And the rest is history. Once you go to one, you meet a bunch of people, you get into the cool after parties, and you meet all these different movers and shakers. And then you see if it's something that aligns with you, something you're interested in, and something that you can contribute to the movement or to that ecosystem. And then that yields invitations to more things. And fast forward this year, I got invited out to Breaking Convention in England, which is one of the best. It's the largest psychedelic research conference in Europe. And then through that, I got to be a keynote speaker. Then I got invited to Hungary to a 30,000 person Psytrance festival. And the more of these gigs that you do, and if you're good at being on stage, which certainly not everyone is, but I can tell you have that gift, Daria, then more opportunities open up like that. And that's where I'm at now.
I love that. So beautiful, and so beautiful to witness you and in your growth. And I'm celebrating you from California.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm celebrating you.
Thank you. So yeah, I would love to speak into psychedelics and humor and how what inspired the comedy and all of that. First, I would love to share, for me, I find so much joy in making people laugh. And for me, it actually really started with my family and wanting to get reactions from my mom and play jokes. And just seeing her laugh brings me so much joy. And so that's where it started for me. And then I lived in Colorado for 2 years and just tapped into a bunch of different spiritual communities. And then I started following my friend Kyle, which I actually recorded a podcast episode with him as well, called like The Cosmic Joke, and really just bringing lightness and humor to the space of spirituality and healing, because sometimes I feel like we can get so caught up in like doing the dark, deep shadow work. And then like we forget that play and joy can also be extremely healing, and humor. So I'd love to hear what that experience was like for you, and how does humor serve as a form of medicine in navigating the complexities of life and challenges and things also that come up during even psychedelic journeys.
I think that humor is a form of alchemy, that you can take on really serious energies, really dense subject matters, and you can take the power away from them and create something that's more accessible, that's a little lighter, and at the end of the day, more fun. I think it's really easy to get bogged down in heaviness. And I think humor actually is a great tool for investigating, probing, and hopefully transmuting in a sort of alchemical way that heaviness into laughter, joy, light, the good things. And as many of you have noticed, there's a lot of heavy, dense, negative energies floating around right now. It's hard to get away from them in a lot of ways. It's just been a lot of challenging circumstances for a lot of people with everything going on in the world. And I find that the most resilient people and communities are the ones who can retain their sense of humor in the face of all of the terrible things that happen. And like, I remember through my travels around the world, like many of the people that popped to mind, the most memorable people, they were funny people. It's like a guy in Thailand who's in an elephant camp up in the mountains, and they don't have a lot going on. And he's very self-deprecating and like playing jokes on the tourists and making jokes at our expense and at his expense. And I'm like, this guy gets it. Even in a relatively harsh, limited circumstance, the dude is still super happy. He's laughing. The kids are laughing. And it almost made me shameful to be like, man, I come from a culture of such abundance and material abundance. Mm-hmm. And I'm always taking everything so seriously. Look at the news cycle sometime. If you could just develop a sense of humor, I'd way rather watch like Stephen Colbert or Saturday Night Live than a lot of the mainstream news that gets trotted out. And that's where I've stacked my chips. with mycopreneurs. Oh, you can take on serious subject matters, but you can do it in a humorous way that brings joy and that brings laughter. And that's a very binding element between people. If you have good laughter with someone, you're going to have a good relationship with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like play and humor are some really core values of mine. And even throughout my own psychedelic experiences and journeys, or even microdosing, there are just some times where I've just created content and I'm like laughing at myself creating the content and laughing at the pain. And that is extremely healing. It can really be. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And can you share more about how do you find and maintain the balance between humor and seriousness in those settings?
Great question. Yeah, it's one to navigate. I think it's a practice. As you say, you have these core practices or principles. And my practice is to lean into satire, which I also think satire can be quite dark. It's one of the reasons I love it, because I think that having the tool set to take on dark subject matters and to look at the shadow side of things, that's actually really profound, because it's not going to go away by ignoring it, but by using tools, by using satire, you can examine some of these more serious subject matters. So actually, in many ways, I think it is quite dark. And I look at shows like South Park or Sacha Baron Cohen, right, Borat, and so on and so forth. They're actually very dark energies that they're exploring and talking about a lot of the time, but it's done in a way where it's not so threatening or scary. There's something about laughter and humor when like serious things come up, and this can extend to when you're in ceremony or you're using psychedelics and something serious comes up. Like, you can navigate it, but you can also have that lens of humor to help you retain some of your personal power. So I think it's, yeah, navigating is really important. And especially now when there's so many conflicting narratives in the world, there's so many different worldviews going head to head, be they politically or religions or geopolitically. Like, you have these really tense frictions that are happening. And I think the most successful and unbiased frames for unpacking those oftentimes are humor. I look at The Onion, and like a lot of times The Onion goes really dark, but you can't help but laugh at it a little bit. And you'll be like, yeah, dude, we're humans. We humans like to think we have everything figured out and everything makes sense. But at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of things we don't understand. And that tool of humor, I think, can help you be okay with that and be like, hey, maybe I don't understand everything. Maybe I don't have all the answers, but I'm not tripping. I'm taking it easy. I'm having a good time. It's okay that I don't understand. And then that weight off your shoulders is so liberating to be like, I don't have to personally solve all the world's problems. I don't have to keep myself from falling apart all the time. Like, I'm already an awesome human, and I'm not a perfect human, but it's good to be able to laugh about it and to say, I don't have to have all the answers, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And really like leaning into the unknown and being okay with that. And I'm also curious, how do you balance like running a business that is in psychedelics and then also balancing the humor aspect with that? Are there times where you've created content or you're like conceptualizing something and you're like thinking, oh fuck, what if this goes south? Or what if people perceive this the wrong way? Or do you have any self-doubts with that at all? Or like any like little insecurities that come up, or like questioning yourself with that?
Occasionally, not really, because I think I've earned that trust from the audience that I've cultivated and the network that I've cultivated, where I'm not really trying to use shock and awe for shock and awe's sake. Like, I think people give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm trying to have nuanced discourse and interesting creative takes on a lot of hot button issues. So I think that's very important, like for anybody building a brand, is cultivating your core network or your audience who give you that benefit of the doubt. And then it's easier to bring people into the fold if you already have a network that has been writing with you and following you and you're having ongoing dialogue with. But I will say that as the brand or as the platform gains more visibility and more influence, it definitely requires a little bit more of a circumspect like scrutiny when you're looking at things. And for example, when I first started putting out satire videos, I thought, okay, I'm just going to push this as far as it can go. And then not everybody's going to see it. And once it becomes popular, you're like, oh, I didn't consider that I said something controversial and maybe it pissed this person off. But that really just becomes about relationship management. And as an example, get as many people's phone numbers as you can. Like, I've been writing about policy lately, dipping into policy reform. And that's a really controversial, sensitive subject because there has so many different stakeholders and ideologies involved. And I've had friends that I put something out and I have great respect for them and they respect for me. And then they really don't like the way I phrased something or said it. So then I'm just like, hey, just text me. We don't have to do this on social media. And I think anyone will tell you running a brand is all about relationships. It's all about maybe you fuck up or maybe you make a mistake or something. Be accountable and transparent. And that will serve you very well. If you're like, oh, especially if you're in the line of business I'm in, which is essentially creating provocative, independent, critical content. And I think a lot of opportunities come from that because not a lot of people are willing to establish or voice less popular opinions or controversial opinions. The safe thing to do for a lot of brands is to stay out of controversy and to just try to like stay very sterile, if you will. But I've intentionally chosen or been routed towards this other road where I'm not afraid to take on controversy. And I've learned that using humor is the most effective way to do that, hands down.
I love it. I love it so much. Are there times where, like, when you first were starting, where you, like, how did you create this confidence within yourself to express yourself fully? Like, there's a lot of people out there who maybe look at your videos and be like, oh, I could never create something like that. I'm afraid what people will think. So how did you overcome that?
That's such an important question that so many people, including myself, have wrestled with a lot. But honestly, the honest answer is when you see something that's successful, oh, that looks really good. And then you compare yourself against that. You're comparing wherever you're at on your journey with someone maybe who's 10 years ahead of you on that journey. And that's not really like a good comparison. So if you were to go back to 2014 or 15 and see the early content that I was making, it's cringe content. And at a certain point, you just have to cringe. And I think that's where the satire comes in. Make fun of yourself. Be cringe. As a matter of fact, one of the more successful creators I've seen in the mushroom space, Farm Boy Slim, who has a very robust TikTok presence, like he's even acknowledging now he's putting out cringe content. He's trying to change his creative direction and he has a new creative chapter. And he said it like, yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm trying to do something new. So that sense of putting yourself out there and taking the leap of faith, ultimately, if you keep going, you're going to be rewarded because it's so easy for somebody to say, oh, that content sucks, but they didn't put it out. You put it out. So you have to tell yourself and be like, all right, I'm going to put this out. I'm going to make this contribution. And then the next one is going to be better. And I'm going to learn from the audience too. And that's what got me doing satire. Like I never planned on doing it. I just did some random content. It took off. People liked it. And I thought, I better double down on that. And like pretty much any successful artist or creator who's been in it for a long time will tell you that there's 100 or 1,000 things that didn't work and that sucked, but you only need 1 or 2 to start taking off and then double down on that. And that's when you find your niche.
Definitely. Yeah. And I relate to that so deeply. When I lived in Colorado, what really started my fuel for grocery store content and teaching people about toxins and healing with food as medicine is I used to work for GT's Kombucha. And I remember this was a time where during COVID, like everyone was like freaking out. We were locked up and putting masks on and stuff. And I remember just being in the grocery store and seeing the food choices that people were making. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is why America is ill, is because of what we're putting in our bodies. And so I was inspired. I was like, I'm going to just create a video educating people about kombucha and how don't buy this one instead. Because I was working for GT's Kombucha and that video blew up. And then I just kept building momentum off that. And then it's similar to what you're saying. It just continued, you know? And that was just because I was in a place of like inspiration and creativity.
Yeah, and your content is so niche. I love it so much. Like I haven't seen anybody doing what you're doing, and it's so important. I think I saw a long time ago somebody do this bit where he goes into people's fridges and opens the fridge and says, don't eat that, don't eat that. And like it's also so important because we've been miseducated or misinformed for so long about nutrition. And like that's something that I've always grappled with. Like my family, several members have adult onset diabetes that comes largely as a result of lifestyle choices. And in a lot of ways, you don't know what you should be eating. You don't know about seed oils. You don't know about different levels of, I shouldn't drink 8 coffees a day. What? Worst place incentivizes drinking 8 coffees. So I just want to commend you on finding a really solid and really important niche of what you're creating right now.
Thank you. Yeah. And as I've gone to these mushroom conferences, this is actually one of the biggest gaps that I've seen in the psychedelic industry that I really believe that I'm here to close with whomever wants to join me on this journey. But that's like, why are we not talking about food and toxins at these conferences? Like, we're talking about ascension and ceremonies and all of these things, but then people are still drinking like alcohol or Coca-Cola, or they're like not being mindful. And this is not me for me to judge. This is just me sharing my observation and how I feel that by implementing microdosing, for example, can help people become aware to, oh, actually, like cleaning with Clorox doesn't make me feel good because I'm more sensitive, because I'm connecting to my body, to nature. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too. I'm always looking for nuance and dialogue and looking to learn from people. And part of the thing I realize is like, man, I got to branch out and have different people than this inner circle. You know, I think that when you go to these conferences, you see a lot of the same people. And like for a long time, a lot of the same people are popping up on podcasts. So it's nice to see it growing. And I advocate for a lot of people to jump in there. If you're listening to this, and you want to or have an idea that you could do a podcast or do something like Daria and I are doing, it's not a super crowded space, believe it or not. Yes, it seems like it's crowded, but there's not that many of these podcasts and platforms that are covering psychedelics and covering nutrition and so on. And even if there are, like, your voice and your perspective matters. I firmly believe that. I think that it's easy for you to defeat yourself before you even try, just by shutting it down. So just want to give a shout out to people. Like, I think both of us, we're both going to be in Miami next week. Wouldn't have imagined whenever we launched what we're doing that it would provide us these opportunities relatively quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really believe that like our personal stories and even having this conversation just holds such valuable wisdom for people to just learn from and reflect on. So I second you on that. If you're listening to this and you're feeling inspired, like, go do it. Start creating, just start somewhere. And can you tell us also about a transformative experience, or maybe like a moment that you've had where humor played a pivotal role in your own healing journey and how it shaped your approach to psychedelics and being in the industry? Is there a specific moment or ceremony that you have in mind where you're like, this was it for me, this is the point?
Yeah, I can think of a couple for sure. Let's see how intense I want to make this. Probably, honestly, I saw the flaming lips on 2 grams of mushrooms. I've done it twice now, including in Denver. And I was just cracking up the whole time. They're such a fun band. They're so colorful and they're absurd. If anybody's seen the Flaming Lips or familiar, it's a circus. They've got these giant robots on stage and confetti cannons. And I remember them playing a song, and this was when I saw them in Tucson, Arizona a few years ago, and they played one of my favorite songs by them, She Don't Use Jelly. And it was during the middle of the pandemic. Things had just reopened, but it was so strange because everyone was required to wear masks and be 6 feet apart in this music venue. I had never seen a concert like that before. The Flaming Lips are a band that you're supposed to jump on top of each other and all be in one big crowd. It was very strange. And it was the first week or 2 weeks that they started putting events on during the pandemic. And so I had all this bottled up kind of loneliness, this isolation from having been shut in a spot in Malibu for 6 months, like leaving to get groceries, and that's it. And when they played that song, I remember just like laughing at the top of my lungs and literally like screaming, like completely letting loose. And it was so cathartic. It felt so good. And that's also, that type of energy is why I'm a firm advocate for recreational psychedelics. You find something funny, amusing, intriguing, you connect with that emotion. You're happy in that moment. And that's so profoundly restorative and healing and uplifting and beneficial. So I'm a firm believer we just need safe guardrails and education around these things. Because of course, when you use psychedelics or mushrooms, like some difficult stuff will probably come up if you do it even one time or if you do it enough times. And having those moments of pure unadulterated joy and like bliss, like you are excited about life, you're happy to be there, you don't even know why, you just feel really good. Like, you need to have that feeling you can tap into when things get tough. and things get hard. And that's how I carry it with me. It's like when I encounter a challenging situation or traumatic situation, I know that I have these deep reserves of like real happiness that I've experienced at some point in my life. And I certainly attribute using mushrooms and various plant medicines to gifting me that sense of inner strength and peace and joy that is there. And you can go back to it when you need it. So I think that's probably it. But like more specifically, yeah, doing comedy on stage was very fun. I've eaten mushrooms and gone on stage before, and I don't advocate for everyone to do that and put your training wheels on. And I have a long, robust history of trying these things incrementally, going back to 2009 or so, being on stage, having played in bands before, having been a public speaker. And I think that you can hit the pocket. You can find the sweet spot and get into the flow state. And a lot of people talk about flow state. It's a real thing. And you can find that flow state. You can cultivate it and have certain habits and practices that help put you in there. And in that particular case, I've done a number of gigs on stage and just really enjoy it. I really feel a sense of intuition and reacting immediately and being very confident. And all of these things lend well to humor and to being relatable to the audience. That if you find that authenticity in yourself and that joy, lead from there, and anything you're doing is going to be successful.
And that's really it. I really feel it's like the authenticity and also the vulnerability too of this is what I'm going through. And then this is also how I'm using humor to deal with it. And actually, I want to speak into that for a sec, because for a long time, I actually realized that I was using humor as a form of bypassing, like making fun of my trauma, but still like living in the trauma. And then that's a real thing too. So I'm curious your perspective on that, of the difference between healing through humor and then using humor to actually bypass what we're actually feeling.
That's a super astute observation, certainly. Yeah, going back all the way to high school, now that I think about it, I was elected class clown, which I didn't realize was the case until recently. It was just like I was class clown. And I think at that time, when I was 17 or 18, I was using humor more as bypassing in a sense, where I was socially awkward, but I was that guy who could make a joke, right? Or make a humorous observation. And if I could get the group to laugh, then I was welcome in that group. So I think it can be a coping mechanism. It can be because of your social anxiety or whatever your traumas are. So where I'm at now is I'm really studying the craft more of learning about satire, learning about humor. And in doing that, it's an iterative, ongoing process. Like it's not, I have the answers, I know how to do this. It's like you find formulas that work, you find your own unique signatures, energy signatures, if you will. And then you study the craft. And literally, no matter what you're doing, like somebody has done it before you. If you want to be an athlete, if you want to be a surfer, you want to be a comedian, you want to be a writer, there's people who have mastered that craft or are in the endless pursuit of mastery of the craft. And it's a good idea to study and pay close attention to those people. I often look at satire and humor more as a way of offering social commentary and almost accidentally finding a good answer or a good way forward than having all the answers. And yeah, I look at people like George Carlin, one of the masters. I look at E.E. Cummings was a writer. I find him to be quite satirical in his prose. And by studying different people from different eras, different mediums, even Dali, like Salvador Dali has a deep satirical, humorous bent to his work. Anthony Bourdain, the list goes on. Sarah Silverman, huge fan, right? But when you study those things, then you will ultimately realize that you're part of a conversation. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. When you're creating and you're trying to heal in the same way, it's not happening by itself in a vacuum. It's connected to this broader ecosystem or framework. And that's, I guess, where I'm at right now. It's okay, I want to learn from you, and then I want to hopefully in turn contribute something to the dialogue. And if that heals, great. But at the same time, there's this archetype of the wounded healer, of people who, a lot of shamans, a lot of people, like they get put up on a pedestal, but they're actually deeply flawed people. So I think we can't overlook that too. There's this sense of like the guru, the person who has all the answers, and we go to them. But we see a lot that they don't necessarily have all the answers. Maybe they're just very persuasive. So I think that's important too.
Own guru.
Yeah, I'm an advocate. You can learn from people, but it's also good to be skeptical and to have healthy skepticism and be skeptical of your own internal monologue. A lot of people say, the mushrooms told me this. Yeah, how do you know it's accurate? So it's just, that's where humor comes in too, to be like, I don't know if I have all the answers, but I'm going to enjoy the ride. I'm going to choose to enjoy this rather than to hold on super tight.
Yeah, yeah. And like integrating humor sometimes into discussions about psychedelics can be considered quote unquote nuanced. And I think it's important to just, yeah, be discerning and know your own dialogue. And the more that you get to know yourself, like the easier that and clearer that this becomes. And I like to also say that we know everything and nothing all at once. You know?
Spoken like a true psychonaut. Yeah, it's important, huh? I appreciate that. And also, I just want to, we only have about 6 or 7 minutes now, but I just want to compliment you on how eloquent you are. Like, I do a lot of podcasts. I've been going on a lot of podcasts, and you have a really clear and concise way of framing your questions and keeping the flow state going here. So props to you, Daria.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And to wrap it up, I'd love to hear, what do you envision for the intersection of psychedelics, healing, and humor in the realm of wellness and also psychedelics? And then are there any emerging trends or insights that you find yourself particularly excited to share or create around?
Totally. Somebody recently mentioned this to me, and I hadn't considered it this way, but I was approached to be on the board of directors for a company that's raising money, and they have various other exits under their belt. And when they were introducing me to the other board members, somebody said, "Oh, he does psychedelic comedy." And the person says, "You know what? That tells me about the psychedelic ecosystem, that it's grown a lot to the point where there's a common language. Because to be able to have humor and jokes, you have to have enough people who can understand these. So this is actually a really good mirror to the growth of the psychedelic ecosystem. When you can have comedians like Reggie Watts going out there telling jokes about ketamine, and you can have like myself, I make a lot of jokes about DMT or about 2CB or whatever. And just the fact that there's enough of an audience now who can appreciate these jokes and these subtleties, that says a lot about the growth of the psychedelic ecosystem. So that's one thing I'm excited about, just like developing the shared language and framework for understanding and navigating these really interesting substances. And other things I'm excited about is this next Wonderland. Yeah, it's a really incredible group of people. There's a lot of conferences going on this year and next year. And my rally cry to everyone who's interested is find a way to get out there. There's ways to volunteer. Maybe you can't afford the ticket or whatever. Find a way to get out there, sleep on someone's couch, volunteer, carpool and drive 16 hours if you have to. And I quite literally did that for my first 3 or 4 conferences. And then they start flying you out. Take the leap of faith, go out there, make it happen.
Amazing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's what happened to me last year. I volunteered and now I'm speaking. So feel free to reach out to either of us. And to finish it off, where can we find you, Dennis? If you found this episode valuable, please consider sharing it with your friends and your family. Like, we really together, by having these conversations, can expand access to profound healing, especially in the world of psychedelics. And yeah, where can we find you? Tell us.
Mycopreneur, MyCoPreneur. And just Google that. You'll find me everywhere. But I'm pretty active on Instagram. I've been picking up the TikTokery, doing some TikToks for Gen Z. I've got a newsletter, Mycopreneur newsletter, got the podcast, and I'm doubling down on it, just like Daria here. There comes a point where you just go for it and you say, whatever, I got to get another channel dialed in. All right, I've got another channel now. So I'm very receptive to people who want to reach out and chat and keep the discourse going. And I hope to be back on Conscious Conversations at some point to connect with all of you again.
Yeah, next time I'll just fly you out to LA.
You got to do that. When I'm in San Diego and you're in LA, we'll meet in the middle. We'll find something.
Amazing. Cool. Thank you so much for this wonderful conscious conversation. I'm going to link all the information in the show notes below, and we will see you in the next episode.
Cheers, everybody.